Welcome to the Ground Jewels. My name is James Dixon, and thank you for joining us this week. This week we have the fantastic Jonny Owen joining us. Jonny's a man of many talents, wears many hats at different times in his career. You may know him as a filmmaker, you may know him as a presenter from TalkSport. If you go back far enough, he's a musician. I personally love some of the films that he's made. Three Kings about Busby, Stein and Shankly. A really interesting examination of not just those great managers, but the sort of social history of Glasgow and what makes them. And this episode has a bit of social history as well. We're talking about Merthyr, his beloved Merthyr, which is one of the most fascinating places in the UK, I think, and a history that is under-discussed. We go on in the interview, we talk about the industrial history of Merthyr. Did you know that Merthyr was by far the biggest town in Wales at one point, much bigger than Cardiff, much bigger than Swansea. It was one of the first places in the UK to industrialise. It was also had horrendous slums, the legacy of which the town still deals with. It's the first place in the world that the red flag was used as a symbol of working class rebellion. And I don't think people talk about Merthyr enough. And certainly in history that I learnt in school, we would talk about things like Peterloo, other sorts of bits of sort of working class and social history. But the Welsh perspective was left out, which was unfortunate. But it's a really interesting chat. We're talking about Penydarren Park, a great ground, and it is a discussion of Penydarren Park, but it's also a bit of a tribute to all sort of great non-league grounds. I know we talk about Ibrox and we talk about the Westfalenstadion in Dortmund, and we've talked about some really big grounds like White Hart Lane and Wembley, etc. But this is the heart and soul of football, your local community ground, and Jonny's brilliant on it. And Merthyr, have a fantastic history. We talk a lot about their Cup Winners' Cup run from the 80s, where they played Atalanta. I don't want it to be too triggering for Liverpool fans, but that's an interesting conversation. And it's just a really, really nice chat, and I know you're going to enjoy it. Thank you for the kind feedback last week on the Wimbledon episode with Kate Mason. Lots of people enjoyed that. That's great. And as we often do, I have a little bit of news from around the grounds before we get to our interview with Jonny. And we can start with Wimbledon because Wimbledon have put ticket prices up for Devonshire holders. These are the people who get to go every day across the championship, a 5-year period, or more accurately, these are the people who are the only people who are allowed to tout their Wimbledon tickets to make a bit of profit. Their prices have gone up by 45%, and the super rich are not happy about it. Well, never mind. We've got a lot, so it's going to be quick this week. The Chicago Bears, my NFL team, who've had a wonderful week, taking the number 1 overall draft pick, Caleb Williams. And to go along with that new quarterback that they've got there, they've released really exciting plans for a new stadium project for the sort of museum and lakeside area of Chicago. It looks fantastic, and if they can pull it off, it really will be a brilliant addition to the city. Check that out if you're interested in that sort of stuff. Sadder stadium news, more domestically, if you're listening in the UK, that is. And Gateshead were banned from the National League playoffs because of their stadium situation and the fact that they don't have a long-term lease, which meant they would fall foul of EFL rules, which meant they got kicked out of the playoffs despite qualifying for them. Whole rejig around that annoyed Solihull Moors. And actually, precursor club, or one of the precursor clubs to Solihull Moors, Moor Green, come up in the chat with Jonny. But yeah, Gateshead banned from the National League playoffs, which is a bit sad. Middlesex have been talking about leaving Lords permanently after 160 years as sort of tenants of the MCC there. They're playing a few games this year at Essex already, and that club is in a bit of financial difficulty, and they're exploring whether to develop their own ground. It could just be a negotiating position, but that made the news. But the big stadium or venue news this week in the world of sport is undoubtedly the Crucible. We know the World Snooker Championships are happening in Sheffield. We know the Crucible is a relatively small but gloriously intimate venue. Only it holds 980 spectators for any one session. And World Snooker was sort of on manoeuvres, as they often do when they come to Sheffield. Barry Hearn will say, I love Sheffield, I want to be in Sheffield, I just want Sheffield to want us. The last short while he's been publicly saying that they want Sheffield to build a bigger venue. Sheffield does have a bigger venue for like the arena, but I guess that was too big. And they're looking for some sort of intermediate sized venue where they can have 2,000 to 3,000 seaters there, and they're using the sort of threats of taking the competition to Saudi Arabia or China to try and kind of get their way, really. The agreement with World Snooker and the Crucible lasts for another 3 years, to take it up to the 50th anniversary of the World Championships being in Sheffield, which started in 1977. And a number of players sort of weighed in, seemingly semi-encouraged by World Snooker. Certainly, that was my impression to start with. But then the Iranian snooker player Hossein Vafai, not confident on that pronunciation at all. The Iranian, he weighed in, really putting the hammer into the Crucible, and he said that it was like the practice area was like playing in a garage, and that the theatre had an awful smell. And yeah, that wasn't particularly kind, and maybe not even 100% accurate, but it was really strange to see players like Sean Murphy, who had earlier in the week been criticising the Crucible, saying something has to change, we can't have our biggest tournament in our smallest venue, and all these sort of lines, call his criticisms of the Crucible sacrilege, or almost sacrilege, to give the correct quote. I think if you ask the fans, obviously if you ask the fans in Britain, they definitely want the tournament to stay here. That's possibly parochial and possibly selfish view, but something is definitely going to happen there. Either the pretext for Sheffield to build a new venue, or the pretext for World Snooker to take the event away from Sheffield. And if it leaves Sheffield, I can't imagine it staying in the UK. If you do, like me, believe the Crucible is one of the great venues in sport, and you've never been, you've got a couple of years to make sure that you go. That's a long way of saying, let's get to Jonny Owen. Today we're joined by Jonny Owen. Jonny is a man who's worn many hats during his time. Musician, actor, producer, presenter and filmmaker, to name a few. Football fans know him best from his documentaries, including I Believe in Miracles about Brian Clough's Nottingham Forest, Don't Take Me Home about Wales' 2016 Euros campaign, and The Three Kings, an examination of Bill Shankly, Matt Busby and Jock Stein. Jonny, welcome to the Ground Jewels.
Oh, well, thank you very much, James. I was going to say I've got a hat on today because we were recording quite early, aren't we? So I got a bit of bed hair going on, so I put a hat on.
Well, this is the thing. We're at different stages of life in terms of parenting. For me, with a 1-year-old, a 9:30 record is late. But for you, yeah, I guess you've pushed through that stage of life, and you're now reclaiming your time. So that's great. Now we could talk about the City Ground or the Cardiff City Stadium or anything else, but we're actually going to focus about something which I think is a little bit more special. We're going to talk about Penydarren Park, home to Merthyr Town FC, and I normally start by talking about the ground, but I want to talk about the town first because the history of Merthyr is fascinating, and I don't think it's well known outside of South Wales. It's sort of the first place in Britain to industrialise, where the first steam railway journey happens. For a short period of time, it's the iron capital of the world and the largest settlement in Wales, much bigger than Cardiff, much bigger than Swansea. And of course, 19th century large urban population means slums and awful living conditions. And then we get the Merthyr Rising in 1831, the first time the red flag is used as a symbol of working class rebellion. Merthyr elects the first Labour MP to Parliament. It feels like it's always been sort of a tough area, but a resilient area. Is that fair? And what were your experiences of growing up in Merthyr in the 70s and the 80s?
Yeah, that's a really good sort of history of the town, I suppose. I mean, the town is very symbolic of South Wales in the fact that it practically didn't exist until the Industrial Revolution. Nobody lived there. It was a few scattered farms on every census. And then when they discovered all the elements they needed for making iron, which was running water, limestone, iron ore, and coal, they had the natural resources in abundance in that area to make iron. So the town grew up really quickly. It was really boosted by Britain's involvement in sort of, an expansion of the empire, Napoleonic Wars. So there was a real need for iron, really, for the cannons that made, the very, very famously, Nelson came to visit Merthyr to see the cannons that won the battles and things that he'd fought. So it was a town that kind of like was invented, really. A huge immigration, inward immigration from right across Wales, but also the west of England, places like northern Spain, Italy, Ireland, obviously. So it was a town that was a sort of a tough frontier town, it was called by historians. Apparently, really, really dangerous conditions because it was mining, whether it be iron ore, coal, or the iron works, which were huge sort of places where lots of heavy industry, giant machinery, molten lava, all that kind of thing. But it was incredibly exciting. All historians talk about this. So the workforce sort of worked hard and played hard. So it had thousands of pubs. There was a saying in Wales that if somebody disappeared from a village in West Wales, it was an actual saying that they'd gone to Merthyr, because Merthyr was seen as a place people went. So we kind of had a Wild West town in Wales, in Merthyr Tydfil. Now, my great grandparents on my father's side ended up there. One set were Irish on my grandmother's side. Another set were Welsh. Classic Merthyr immigration. Went in there to work in the pits and the ironworks, both sides. It was just a place to work. So I'm sort of many generation Merthyr. And one of the anomalies of Merthyr that people always notice, like I said, it's got this amazing history when you scratch it, is that it's a football town in South Wales. So South Wales obviously very famous historically for rugby, embracing the culture of rugby and, the inter-villages. But because Merthyr was a bigger town and grew up the same time as sort of Liverpool and Glasgow, those kind of places, there is a theory that the Irish influx of population just meant that it's very similar in personality to Liverpool and Glasgow, that football became the chosen sport of the people of the town, the working class people of the town. So I very much grew up like that. I always supported Merthyr Town, or Merthyr Tydfil as they were called then. And also I was just played football, watched football. Wales were huge for us. We still watch rugby and people played rugby, but football just seemed to take centre space. And the ground, Penydarren Park, which is right in the middle of the town and has been for like 100 odd years, I kind of always was aware it was there. So it was quite close to my grandfather's house, where I used to spend a lot of time as a kid. So we used to just sort of like that classic way kids, we used to hang around sort of the area and the ground. So it was always kind of there for me, really, from a young kid. When I went to games when I was really young, I was taken by my father and my grandfather. So it was always kind of the centre of the town. I've always described it as the heart of the town, really, the football club. It's where people sort of congregate. It's got a big sort of social club where people go to in the week. So the town, is a football town and a famous historical town, like you said, with a working class, tough working class reputation. And I've loved growing up there. A big extended family, lots of cousins, that kind of thing. Great schoolmates. I still enjoy going back. So I find myself, as I get older, thinking I was blessed actually to grow up there, really. It's really strong family infrastructure. And, I love going back there, and I love taking people back as well to see the ground.
Yeah, I mean, you've perfectly anticipated my second question, which was why you think it's a football town and not a rugby town. But do you remember your first game? What age were you when you were first went down there? Who were you going with? And obviously, it left an impression on you.
Yeah, it did. My father was a massive Merthyr fan, and my grandfather was a big and my great grandfather was a big Merthyr fan as well. And his name was David Owen. He was a miner. And obviously they remember Merthyr being in the Football League famously. What happened there was the English League, the Welsh League, as they were playing amongst themselves, sort of Cardiff, Swansea, Aberdeen, Merthyr, were getting huge crowds. So the English League invited certain clubs to come and join because they wanted the crowds. So they were invited to the league, and then this awful sort of happened in the 20s, more of a depression, really, as they called it, which, sort of really smashed South Wales in particular. This is post First World War. So thousands left, great diaspora towards London and the Midlands. And it was a really tough time. I think there's some shocking figures of like 75% unemployment in Merthyr at this time and 80% in Dowlas, which are shocking figures. So nobody went to the games. So they were getting crowds like 13 and 14. So they'd gone from crowds of tens of thousands to 30 because people couldn't afford to go. But there's this amazing story my grandfather told me that his father told him of thousands of people standing outside the ground waiting for the result because they couldn't afford to go in. So there's this amazing story and image of the town really wanting to support the team, but they just couldn't. I mean, if it's a choice between feeding your children to a football match, as it was in those days, there was no social, security system. They had to feed their children. So the football club went bust when it came back, same ground as Merthyr Tydfil. And then they had one of the best teams in Britain, certainly in non-league, after the Second World War. So my father then watched that team, and I grew up on those stories. And I can remember going to a game really young. I went to a friendly against Watford. I've spoken to a few Merthyr historians, and they're very good in this because I'm a bit sketchy with the dates, as people tend to be. I definitely went to a game against Watford, which was a friendly, where Merthyr won 3-2 in the end. I went to an FA Cup game against Cheshire, where I remember walking down from my grandfather's house and missing the first goal because we could hear the cheer. My father stopped and went, Merthyr have scored. And then there was also a Welsh Cup game against Swansea when John Toshak was the manager. So that might have been the first one because that would have been really early 80s. So I went to a few games with my father and my grandfather. And then I really started going in my sort of early teens with my mates from my area of Merthyr, Eric, and my cousin Robert. And we used to, so I had family connections to the club. My grandfather's brother, David Owen, was the chairman in the 60s and on the board. And he was a Merthyr fanatic. He only lived in a terraced house. It sounds really grand that he was chairman. And my grandfather said about his brother that he used to give too much money for the club. He used to go, he's an idiot. He gives money where he can. But he loved Merthyr. But he used to work there, and he was kind of always hovering around the gate. So he used to just wave me in. So I got in for nothing. And my mates used to be really dead impressed by this, the fact that I was waved in by this fella going, Jonathan Owen, go on, son, you come in. So that's my childhood memories are really interlinked with the club. I just remember, like I said, going as a boy with my father and grandfather, then starting to go with my mates. And then something remarkable happened, really. When I got to about 16, and I didn't realise how rare it was at the time, Merthyr suddenly took off, really. They got this football team that came together. And then, a bit like the post-war team, they probably became one of the best teams in the non-league pyramid and system for about a good 5 or 6 years. And, there were reasons for that. I believe now. It was a unique time in football. You could probably earn more money playing for Merthyr than Cardiff or Swansea in those days, which sounds ridiculous, but football then was very different. There wasn't the TV money in the game. And if you played what was called part-time for Merthyr, with win bonuses and a job, you could probably earn as much, if not more, than somebody playing for Cardiff and Swansea. So we kind of had all the best players in South Wales certainly for about a good 3 or 4 years. And that meant Merthyr really progressed through the leagues and, achieved all these kind of amazing cup, giant killing feats over the period. So I then suddenly thought that was normal. I thought that was the way football was between the age of, say, 16 and 21. But I now realise it was a real golden era for the club.
It really was, and we will get to that stuff because I think that sort of 86 to 92 period is your golden era, but it comes as interesting developments are happening with the League of Wales and other things like that. So it's sort of an inflection point in there. But I just wanted to, and I don't want to stoke the fires of sort of Welsh nationalism here, but I'm going to point out there's been a few times in sort of Merthyr's history where the English have a little bit screwed you over. You talked about that sort of Depression time era. You lost your Football League status to a club called Thames Association, which were a completely invented club, sort of an early sort of prototype of MK Dons. Some businessmen had built a massive capacity stadium and thought, oh, let's get a football team in here to make some extra money. They take your place, and they lasted only 2 seasons before folding, and they still hold the non-COVID record for the lowest attendance in the Football League of less than 500 spectators. And then that time that you mentioned after the war, you've got you're winning the Southern League 5 times in 7 years, but you're finding English teams like Gillingham and Colchester who are finishing below you because at that time there's no promotion relegation, it's election, and the Football League is voting in these English teams that are less good than you into their little club. Do you think, and you still remain in the English pyramid today, do you think there'll ever be a time where you switch to the Welsh pyramid, or is Merthyr firmly, is that rebellious streak in Merthyr gonna sort of stay different, stick to its traditional identity?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a question my best friend growing up, Alex, who was a Merthyr fanatic, me and him used to go together, still see each other all the time. He doesn't go anymore because he believes we should be in the Welsh League. He's never been since that fracture, really. So there are people that feel really passionately that we should be in the Welsh League. Then there are other people like me, and we are best friends, who believe our USP, our unique selling point, is the fact that we are in the English League, representing Wales and playing English clubs every week, and therefore we stood up. For me, that means more that we are playing sort of, English opposition. It is fascinating because, again, that sort of like is it almost like I don't know, a sort of a good indication or a symbol really of Welsh history, because all the time we were the best team in non-league and we were trying to get elected desperately. It was the Welsh teams that voted against us, not Wrexham, but South Wales teams, because they believed that we were taking crowds off them, and if we went to the Football League, we'd take more. So the irony was, of course, our own fellow Welsh clubs were the ones voting against us. So that really, really stayed with my father and people like that, because they really held a grudge about it. Even though they'd go and watch Cardiff and Swansea, they felt they were quite let down. And I can understand the economic reasons of certainly Cardiff, which Merthyr is a big Cardiff City supporting town. I've gone to watch Cardiff myself a lot of times in my life, and but a lot of the older generation feel that we were let down there. So there's it's a really complicated sort of history, really, and I think the Welsh League thing that happened, like I said, my mate Alex is a great example of somebody that absolutely won't go again until we join the Welsh League. He thought this was a great moment, of us playing in Wales, and helping Wales' infrastructure, and then ended up playing in Europe. But, my counter argument to that is that, you never get sort of that excitement of I think sport, you have to broaden yourself, broaden horizons sometimes. I think that's why the Champions League and the European Cup were inevitable in football history. And you test yourself in life by playing people from different areas. And also, our record in Europe under the Welsh League is shocking, really. I mean, it's so far away from how good Merthyr were in the Welsh, when winning the Welsh Cup and then playing in the European Cup and this Cup now, that all our teams are out by June and losing to teams from Andorra and things. So I don't think it's strengthened, personally. I don't think it's strengthened the Welsh system. I understand the reasons for doing it. The FAW needed to do that to stay as an independent football association. But I think that Merthyr, for me, is a team that famously always played in an English system, a system they were invited into. And they, that's become our sort of, like I say, in our distinct history. I think we're the last non-league team left, actually, in the English pyramid system.
You are now that Wrexham got promoted last year, and there's obviously that big and Connors Quay were the other one. They left. They went back to Wales, I think 2019 or 2020. So yeah, you are the last holdout.
We are. I mean, and you know what? I've been to see a lot of Welsh League football, and I admire it, and I want it to thrive, and I understand why it's there. It's a massive, massive internal battle for me, there's, as a Welshman, to sort of see Merthyr. But I still think Merthyr are very, you'd say to me, Jim, Merthyr are a very unique Welsh club. And I think it kind of makes us in some ways as Welsh, certainly, and the fact that we're playing English opposition as a Welsh club, we sing Welsh songs, people sing English songs. I think that's only a good thing in sport, and that intense rivalry was something that should be kept. But that's just my opinion, of course.
That's absolutely fine. That's why you're here. You're here to give your opinion. Let me take you back to 1986, the start of that sort of golden period. Bob Latchford signs for Merthyr, and Bob's from my neck of the woods. He's from Kings Heath in Birmingham, and at one point he's the British record transfer. Scores over 100 goals for Everton. He's an England international, and at age 35, he's sort of turning out for Merthyr, who at that point are in the 7th tier in the Southern League Western Division. So, and I think you mentioned it before in terms of the ability to, sort of make money might have been more at non-league than the lower reaches of the Football League. But you have a sort of great Welsh Cup run that year, reaching the final for the first time since the early 50s. And you're going up against Newport County, then of the 3rd division. So there's at least 3 divisions between you. And you have 2 finals, in fact, because you draw the first one and you win the replay. What are your memories of those finals against Newport, which I think were played at Nottingham Park?
They were, yeah, I remember them very, very well. It's interesting when you talk about Bob Latchford. Bob Latchford coming was the catalyst. That changed everything in the dynamic of Merthyr Tydfil, Merthyr Town. I remember it vividly because Bob was such a famous footballer and so well known. And it just was a real statement of intent, I felt. I thought, something's happening here. We all did. And I think the effect that Bob had, Bob is still hugely popular in Merthyr. He comes down and gets given a hero's welcome. He's as loved in Merthyr as he is in Everton or Birmingham City, I'd say. It's a great story that, like I said, about this sort of this convergence of all these things that happened and this perfect storm. So Kevin Rogers, who played for Villa, Birmingham, and Wrexham, he'd come back to Merthyr. He was homesick. Kevin, he's a Merthyr boy, born and bred, fantastic footballer. He was my favourite player because he went to the same school as me. So I'd grown up on stories of Kevin, and he played for like Georgetown Boys Club, and he was a bit homesick. Kevin. It was just one of those things. He wanted to come back, and he was looked after. The financial incentive for him to come back was there. So Kevin was a player, for example, that was playing patently below the standard that he should be playing. And in today's game, I think with the money, he'd be playing at least League One or Championship football, genuinely. But he decided to come back to Merthyr, and he tells me a great story that one of the first times he seen Bob Latchford in the dressing room, Bob was, he said, a beautiful, sort of handsome man, immaculate, blazer, tie, and he comes in. And a player called Di Webley, who was one of our greatest ever strikers, and a winger called Kerry Williams, who had played league football for Newport and come to Merthyr. Kerry was a tarmacker from the Rhondda, tattoos, and Di had worked in a foundry in Abertillery, so he'd come in with coal dust on his eyes and things. I can remember Kevin saying, Kevin was in a blazer as well, Kevin had just come from league football. You could kind of see Bob looking at these two, and they both had a cigarette, well, certainly Kerry had a cigarette, and they're chatting away before the game. And he's kind of looking, and then half time he comes in and he says to Kevin, I'm having them two. Because he's played a half of them and he's gone, wow, they can play. So it's a great story of Bob himself coming to Merthyr and going, I've got some players here. Kevin's arrived at this time. There's a few others who played, like David Tong has played league football for Cardiff. There's players there with the Football League experience. Paul Giles has turned up. So I think Bob seen that he had the tools there, that he could do something, and the players looked at Bob as an inspiration. So it was a kind of perfect marriage, really. And that then became, like I said, the propeller to really start pushing Merthyr on. That season, we were terrific. Di Webley scored like 50 goals, I think, that season. It was extraordinary. They have scouts there looking for him all the time. I mean, Cardiff and Swansea were always saying to our players, come and play for us. But it just wasn't financially worth it. They were both two clubs bumping around the old fourth division as it was, which would be League Two now. And they were Merthyr winning every week, getting great crowds. The money was a bit better. So there was no reason for them to leave Merthyr. In fact, we were attracting players from across South Wales. So that happened. And then we had this season where we played really well in the league. And then we started this Welsh Cup run. And you could feel it. We went to Carnarvon and got a good result there. They had done really well in the FA Cup the year before. I think they'd beaten Stockport. And so they were in the news and we'd won there. Then we played Bangor, who were a really strong team at the time. I think they'd even played in Europe and whatnot, and we won there over two legs. And then we played Newport County, who were in the third division, League One as it was. Then they'd been relegated that year, but they were still a League One team, and we played them, and we drew 2-2. I remember it really well down in Cardiff. Went with my father, and I was allowed to go. I was doing my O levels. I'm sure my age, James, but I was allowed to go even though I was meant to be revising and things. And I went down to the game, and then the replay was a really weird game. I'll tell you a story. We scored a penalty really early after only about maybe even 3-4 minutes. And I can remember my father saying, well, that could be enough. And it was like 87 minutes to go or whatever it was, with extra time. And me going, oh, okay, because they were which sounds amazing now when you think Merthyr were in the 7th tier and Newport were playing in what we would call League One now. But there was nothing between the two teams. There was nothing between them. They had this 2-2 draw, and this game was really tight. And we won the game 1-0. And I remember, like I say, my grandfather lived quite close to Penydarren Park. I can remember going back to my grandfather's house that night and standing outside his terraced house and looking down towards where the ground was and hearing the singing and seeing everybody, sort of doing what they were doing. I didn't go down to the ground that night. I went back to the house, but I watched them and I heard them, and because obviously they'd won the Welsh Cup, I was delighted. We all were, because it meant European football in them days. Merthyr were going to be in Europe, and remember as well, the English clubs were banned then after Heysel. So it was just the Welsh, Scottish, and Irish clubs that were in Europe. So we knew we'd get a lot of attention and publicity by competing in Europe, and. We've had a good bet. How far have we got? Well, we've got 22 minutes in, and I'm going to say the word, but, obviously everything ratcheted up, to sort of like almost hysterical proportions when we drew Atalanta, we're a crack Italian team in the first round of the European Cup Winners' Cup.
Yeah, and you do draw Atalanta. And I wonder if you've ever given thought to the sort of alternative history, because they're not the Coppa Italia winners.
No,
Napoli are,
yeah,
and if you get a different result between like a Napoli and Juventus game, and Juventus win the Serie A, then
yeah,
there's a chance that it's Diego Maradona who's coming to Merthyr rather than Glenn Stromberg. Could you
yeah.
imagine Maradona in Tiffany's nightclub?
Yeah, probably he'd have loved it in there as well. Let me tell you, and they'd have loved it as well. No, yeah, I mean, and I think he would have come as well. They would have played. I mean, teams in those days just played their strongest team, and there wasn't the giant squads you get now. There was squads of like sort of 13, 14, sometimes 18 would have been considered a big squad in those days. But I've no doubt that Maradona would have come and would have played. But when we drew Atalanta, I can remember. Sort of like people with a bit more culture, I suppose, going. Bergamo is a beautiful city in northern Italy, and we're going to have to go there. But I had this weird thing where we've been so good the season before we won the Welsh Cup. We it's an interesting thing. We didn't get promoted that season. We missed out on the last day to VS Rugby. I remember because we'd started that season sluggishly. We'd started the season sluggishly, and then we made a few signings in the sort of October, November. Some players came. Lynn Jones, who was our manager, Lynn Jones is God, was sprayed. So they all called him God. That was his nickname. And he brought in some players, and then we started on this sort of journey, and we just left ourselves too much to do. But we went on this streak where we won about 10 games in 12, and almost got promoted, which had repercussions, I believe, 2 or 3 years later, and I'll explain why. But we won the Welsh Cup, and then the following season, we did storm that league. It was called the Beezer Holmes Midland Division, and we won it at a canter. But we started that year in fine form. I think we beat a team like 8-1, Rushden at home, and we were flying. So when Atalanta came, bizarrely, and I was talking about this to my best mate Alex the other day, and he goes, "Yeah, I thought we were going to win," which now sounds preposterous because people have said it's the greatest upset in European football history, and a few people have said what else is close to it? A team from the seventh tier beating like a crack Italian team full of internationals, but I was a bit like, well, Merthyr were really good. It was different than in European football. It was two legs. Nobody enjoyed coming to Penydarren Park. It was up in the valleys, It was a few years after the miners' strike, so everybody was really pretty sore about that. We felt like, that we'd been let down and we'd lost this monumental industrial battle, for our way of life. And, only 2 years later, there we are on the world stage and, there's this Italian team coming. And I did speak to Kevin Rogers after, who did say to me that, in the dressing room, which sounds funny now, the Merthyr players are going, they won't fancy it tonight, this lot. If you get stuck into them early doors, it's very, British thing, the way of, you get stuck into them early doors, get an early goal, and make sure they don't, run away with it in the first 20 minutes, then, we've got a chance against these. And that's exactly the way it proved to be, full ground, incredible atmosphere, an amazing build-up in the press, like I said. And don't forget, James, we were the first British team to play in a team since Heysel. So there was huge amount of world press. There was like we were on like American news channels and things like that because it was a world story really. Saints and Greavesy and Football Focus hanging around the town, and it was all this going on. It was an amazing week really in Merthyr's football's history. There's never been a week like before or since, obviously. So we were on all the news, all the breakfast news and all the rest of it. There was this big build-up. You had like spaghetti eating competitions in the town and all sorts of stuff. Obviously, a big Welsh immigrant population, Italian immigrant population in the valleys, the coffee shops, the brachis, as they called them, and really famous families like the Sidolis and all these kind of people that were involved and, and were interviewed and were a big part of it. So by the time the game started, it was, the attention was on us and we were ready for it. I felt we were ready for it. The crowd were ready for it. It was a sellout. It was a pack there. The team were ready for it. And the Atalanta came and, we shook them. We scored early. They did equalise, but then in the second half, it was all us. And then we scored at the very end to win 2-1. And I can remember walking away from the ground, and even at 16, I was thinking, I know something magical has happened tonight. Even I felt it. Now, at 52, I go, it was incredible. But even at 16, I was like, I guess something's massive has happened there. And then the next morning, of course, all the news. They had like Kevin Rogers and Kerry, the boy with the tarmac, live on GM TV and BBC Breakfast. Was from Merthyr. It was amazing. And we went to school the next day. We were all in school. And I can just remember everybody sort of like, just bouncing around the corridors and things because the world's attention was on us for football, which we all loved, and our team, and they'd done us so proud. And, a Merthyr boy and a Rhondda boy had scored the 2 goals. It was remarkable, really, that what happened and something I'll never forget.
It really, it sounds remarkable and it sounds preposterous,
Yeah.
35 years hence, Merthyr beat Atalanta. I mean, they're going for the Champions League, or they're, that's they're in European football still. I think one of the things that, you've covered that wonderfully, but the Heysel thing is quite important, particularly for what we're thinking about in terms of talking about grounds and things like that. And it very nearly doesn't even happen in Merthyr. The assumption to start with is, you can't possibly host this game. It's going to have to go somewhere else. And I think the chairman at the time sort of tries to rally people, and the town really sort of rallies behind and puts a load of work and improvements into to developing the ground so it would pass an inspection. So you could have that moment in Merthyr, because I don't think it would have been as special if you beat them at Nottingham Park.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I was delighted that the chairman at the time, a guy called John Reddy, needs to take a lot of credit for that. He was a local councillor and a businessman, and he was one of those people that really, really pushed for something, and he really wanted it in the town, and I'm so glad. But it was a massive communal effort as well. Local businesses contributed. That lad I keep mentioning, Alex, he was up there with a few other of my mates, just doing stuff that summer, painting, and also, and they did it all just for a ticket for the game. It was so there was this huge communal effort. I used to go up there because I'd got a job that summer. I just finished my O-levels and I got a job, and but in the evenings I used to go up on my bike and I used to just look at the developments, and sometimes I'd save it up, so I'd give it like a week, and I'd go up and I'd see like an extra bit of stand, like, oh my god, So it was so exciting, and the ground to this day, when people come to Merthyr Town's ground, they always remark on it's a beautiful little ground. It's just had a load more done to it about 4 or 5 years ago, and they go, wow, this is a proper football ground. The terraces are beautifully done, and that all started really after the Atalanta game. Before the Atalanta game, there was a grass bank either side, 2 little stands. But after the Atalanta game, everything we had to reach or sort of tick off the the boxes for UEFA regulations. So there was segregation, certain amount of seating, terracing, safety. It had to be a European standard ground, and I don't think we'd have beaten Atalanta at Nottingham Park. Bigger pitch, all those kind of things. It was a massive operation to get it done. And don't forget, like you said, it's really important to remember this is only a few years after Heysel, 2 years after Heysel. Obviously, Cardiff City in particular had a reputation at this time. Merthyr were no angels. There was a lot of trouble on that last day when we lost to VS Rugby. So Merthyr could be a bit lively. It was a tough old industrial area. This is the 80s. So there was a fear about what would happen, for that. But everything went off as like a dream. Everything went off better than we all possibly imagined. On the pitch, it was amazing. Off the pitch, not only was there no trouble, everybody swapped scarves with the Italians, and to this day, Merthyr have a relationship with Atalanta. Boys go over, and there's a Martyrs Atalanta group who go to, and so there's a real relationship between the two clubs. So it couldn't have gone any better. Before, you'd have been worried about there being trouble, Merthyr losing 8-0, all that kind of stuff, which is what a lot of people thought would happen. And then the complete opposite happened. There's a great lesson in life. Merthyr win. There's an amazing sort of bonding between the two crowds. Merthyr are massively, commended for the way they're treated. UEFA are delighted that finally a British club has played an Italian club and it went off without any problems. So Merthyr couldn't have come out of it looking any better, really, in every aspect, whether it be on the pitch or off the pitch. And, like you're saying, 30-odd years later, whatever it is, you look back and you do go, wow, there were so many things that could have gone wrong in so many ways, but actually everything went right. And, I was there to witness it, experience it. And I thought at the time that, this is just the way it was. But now looking back as an adult, sort of an older man, I realised there was an extraordinary amount of work that went into it. And I got to say, I take my hat off to the team, the people that owned Merthyr at the time, the town. They were remarkable, really. And it's wonderful that people still to this day talk about it. I did something for the BBC on the, what would it have been, 30th anniversary or 40th anniversary? The decades go so fast. And I did a bit with Kevin Rogers, one of the goal scorers, and I spoke from the ground about Atalanta. And he said to me after, it's had 1 million views across the world, He said it was our biggest thing for that few days, Merthyr talking about Atalanta. And I just think it's got this place, and I talk to really brilliant football writers like Henry Winter and Paddy Barclay, and they always say to me as a Merthyr boy, oh, when you beat Atalanta, everybody references it. Everybody. It's something that's really stayed in people's minds. And my theory on that is that we were the only British team really at that time that did play an Italian team in those years, and it did a lot to help, everybody in sort of not healing those awful wounds, but you could sort of look and say, well, you can come to Britain and you can, play a game of football and it be conducted in an environment where it's nothing but positivity and everybody comes out of it looking better, really. And credit to Merthyr for that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And you obviously, we talked a lot about the first leg because the second leg doesn't quite go as goes well. It goes as expected. I mean, Atalanta are a good side. They get to the semi-finals of the competition.
Yeah.
But you kind of use these matches to sort of kick on, and 4 years in a row, you reach at least the first round of the FA Cup. There's some back-to-back promotions. You're in the conference, and you finish fourth in the conference in 91-92, which means you're just you're within touching distance of Wrexham and Cardiff in the fourth division. But that's the high point for Merthyr. What goes wrong? Does anything go wrong, or is it just the sort of natural end of a golden period?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the late, great Sir Matt Busby said every team's got 5 years in his opinion. And I think lots of people I speak to agree with that. It's a kind of a 5-year period for teams and then have to be renewed and regenerated. And it's really interesting you said about 86 to 92, that's sort of 5-6 years. It's exactly the sort of the period you get with a team. It's interesting because the away game in Atalanta, I didn't go to the away game. I had mates that went, like my mate Robbie Type, who was only 15. He went, a few hundred Merthyr went to Bergamo. It was amazing. It's great photographs of it and stuff. But again, mentioning Alex, me and Alex watched in our local pub in Hillgerrig, Merthyr Tydfil, and there's a moment about 10 minutes before the end, might even be 8 minutes, Kerry Williams shaves the post. And if it had gone in, it had gone to extra time. So Merthyr put up a terrific fight out in Atalanta. Like I said, only lost the game over, what was it, sort of 3-2 on aggregate, which is remarkable when you think of it. 3-2 we lost, to Atalanta. But then I think, you're absolutely right. We kicked on that season of that, there's no doubt. Like I said, we stormed that league, and then we went up to the Premier, the Beezer Holmes Premier Division, and we stormed that. And then the following year, like you're saying, we did really well. We'd have been in the playoffs now in the GM Vauxhall Conference, which was full of really strong teams. Darlington were in there, Colchester were in there. Merthyr holding their own. I think Merthyr beat Colchester 3-0 at Penydarren Park. So but the next year was outside that sort of 5 to 6 year golden period. And remember what I said: the year that we won the Welsh Cup, we failed on the last day to go up. And I think that extra year, just, because we were no doubt arguably one of the best teams, if not the best team in non-league football. The way we flew through the leagues, we were regularly beating Cardiff and Swansea in the Welsh Cup. Not just beating them 3-0 and 4-1 down at Nottingham Park in the Vetch. We'd beaten Newport, we'd beaten Atalanta, we'd been promoted, then we'd been promoted, then we're in the GM Vauxhall, and then we really competing there. And that 1 year extra, I was talking to Kevin about this, would we have been promoted from the GM Vauxhall on the momentum? And he laughs and goes, we were very good at that point. But then by 92, there's no doubt we needed some extra, Bob was obviously had gone at this point because Bob would have been in his late 30s. Some of the players were getting a bit older. Some of the players had even gone back to the Football League. So we needed extra players. And we still competed in the GM Vauxhall Conference. We were never as good as we were in sort of 90 to 90, so 89, 90, 91. That was Merthyr absolutely flying really on as a football team, and we were never going to be that good again. And like saying, I've had long conversations about this with lads, and they all say the same thing. Money started creeping into football in the mid-90s. Suddenly you started seeing Sky, 92, the boom. That did filter down to the lower leagues. Suddenly you could be on 100, 150 grand a year playing for Cardiff, Swansea, rather than 25 as it was before, 30. And then, ITV Sport put a lot of money in. So you kind of it did become more lucrative to go and play for other clubs in South Wales if you were of a certain standard by the mid to late 90s. And I think a lot of those players I mentioned, like Kevin Rogers is the most perfect example. He would absolutely been playing for Swansea or Cardiff within 5-10 years later, no doubt about it. So, money changed things. People forget, I always say, in the late 80s, if you went to watch Cardiff or Swansea in particular were really struggling in Division 4 at that time. Cardiff were down there, and the team was made up of mostly YTS players, as they called it, their youth training scheme. These people were on like £25 a week, and the kind of older players who'd been brilliant at their time, like Tommy Hutchinson and people like that. Robbie James had gone back. So the teams we imagine now, like Swansea and Cardiff, who've since been in the Premier League and the Championship, produced fantastic teams and played thrilling football. It wasn't like that then. It wasn't like that. So Merthyr was kind of like a place to go, like I said earlier, for players, and you could earn a few more bob. You could still go to work and play for Merthyr. You could win. You could get your win bonus. So it was actually more lucrative and sort of probably more enjoyable, really, to go and play for Merthyr than it was for the local Football League clubs. And that proved to be the case because, the team that were there in the late 80s, early 90s was a fantastic football team. I used to go there. I tell a true story that makes people laugh. I went to a game once and Merthyr lost to Moor Green, who were now Solihull Moors. And my younger brother was with me, my little brother Matthew, and he couldn't believe what was going on. He was kind of looking at me like going, "What's happening?" And I was going, "Oh, Merthyr are losing," and he just couldn't believe it. He was almost like he couldn't compute what was happening in front of him because we just used to win every game. You'd go on a Saturday for years and you just think, "Well, how many is it going to be by this week?" That's how you'd think. So I was a bit like, I lived in a golden time when I seen our best ever team. And I'm thankful for it. And whenever I see them, I'm 16 again. I seen them the other week, James, at Merthyr, and I'm 16 again. Di Webley was there, Kerry Williams turned up, and there was Kevin Rogers. And every time I see them, I'm 16 again. And they say to me, "Oh, I've seen you on TalkSport and I've seen your films." And I'm like, no, forget all that. I was there when you beat Atalanta. I was down in Swansea when you won us 3-0. And you could see them going, "Oh, yeah." And I talk in detail about them. I love them. They are, one of my great ever sort of sporting memories. That team. I can always name the team and all that kind of thing. There's two teams for me in my life really that have come along and I've gone, wow. It was I watched and I seen. It was the Merthyr team of the late 80s, and it was the Welsh team of the did so well in the Euros, that sort of mid sort of 2005, 2016, so 2015, 2016 team. They're the two teams that are kind of imprinted on my memory. That I go, "Oh my God, those teams were like," I was lucky to have those teams in my life, and it may never happen again, but I'm glad I had them.
Yeah, it's also delightful for me as Moor Green was the first football game I ever went to.
Was there?
Yeah, I'm from Birmingham originally, and so they were based in sort of, I think, Hall Green area of Birmingham, so it's not too far. And my dad took me to a Moor Green Crawley Town game. Crawley won, so never mind. But yeah, so Moor Green were my first, and Moor Green actually. Let's not make this a Moor Green podcast, but Moor Green had also similarly gone on that journey with you. They'd been promoted from the 7th to the 5th. They'd gone with you with some of those promotions, and that probably was the best Moor Green team ever as well. But we because Moor Green's not in Wales, we don't get to play in European football. No one remembers that Moor Green team, although they were quite fun. I don't know if Ian Taylor played for it at the time. I'll check anyway. But yeah, Moor Green, park it. So you've got that great time, and then I guess you're talking about the financial stuff. 2009, the club enters administration. The supporters trust step in and run the club on behalf of the administrator. And there's a brief, and now there's a Phoenix club is in Merthyr Town, and there's a brief period where you have to leave Penydarren Park. Looking back, I mean, what was that time like? And I think it's now happier times, but there must have been a real fear of losing the club.
Yeah, it was a traumatic time, and huge credit has to go to a band of supporters who really dug in and saved the club. There's a group, there's a very famous fanzine from Merthyr called Dial M for Merthyr, and the people that are around and involved in that, Mark Evans in particular, who's done fantastic things working for the Welsh FA over the last 30 years. People like him were absolutely instrumental in saving the club. No two ways about it. They got us down to Tapswell. Tapswell have to take a huge amount of credit as well. They hosted our home games and gave us the opportunity to get back to Penydarren Park. We had good people at the council who wanted Merthyr. Obviously, like everybody wants football in Merthyr. Everybody wants Penydarren Park to be operating and functional because it's such an important part of the town. So there was a lot of great work done by people. The fans, personal friends of mine, people I know really well. I'd moved away from Merthyr when I was sort of my early 20s. I'd got work in other parts of the country. But I always went home, always, people always remarked to me I've never lost my accent or any of those kind of things, but, I'm a proud Merthyr boy. So I try to help when I can if they ask for stuff like donations and things like that. I always try to help like everybody else, really. But it was the determination of those supporters. And it's kind of changed. It did change my view, James, in the sense of I'm just happy to have a club now. I want them to thrive and I want them to be successful. And there'd be nobody more happy than me if they flew through the leagues. But also, I'm just glad there's a club there. I love going there on a Saturday. It always gets good support. There's a wonderful atmosphere. It's always the same people. And football, you realise a football club is more than just success. But a football club is also a community. It's a place to go. It's a place where people can meet. We're very good on mental health these days, quite rightly, but how essential is football and getting along to a football match for people's mental health? A football ground is much more than a ground. That's why, it's a great title, this, for a podcast, Ground Jewels, because it is. It's like a jewel, really, for someone like Merthyr. That little patch of grass has got so much history on it. Like I said, my grandfather, father, and great-grandfather stood there watching the Mighty Martyrs, and I'll do the same. My daughter's done it. She was up there the other day speaking Welsh. So that it's much more than a club, and I think those fans understood that. And then they have this wonderful banner called Progress Through Stability on a Welsh dragon, and I think that's the motto for the club now: Progress through stability. There's no point in encouraging some businessman to come in, throw money around and recklessly possibly, and then we get promoted or we don't get promoted, and suddenly we've got a massive wage bill and suddenly it's unsustainable. I wouldn't want to go down that route ever again, really. I'd rather the club be sustainable. If it's run by fans, then fantastic. And you build steadily that way. It's much more important to have the club than it is to sort of go chasing sometimes a fruitless dream.
I think that's really important. The stability and the number of clubs that have got themselves into trouble chasing those dreams, and it's great at the time, but the fans are the ones left picking up the pieces because the businessman or whoever, the chief executive who's pushing it, wants to make their name off the back of it. They inevitably move on. Am I right in? Are you technically the stadium sponsor at the moment?
Yeah. Well, me and my missus Vicky McClure, she's obviously done fantastic, and I've been quite lucky. I've done all right in life. So we sponsoring the shirt first, the back of the shirt, with our film company, Build Your Own Films, which was great. And then the club were looking for a ground sponsor. And do you know what? It's a funny story. I got a doctorate from University of Swansea back last year. And when I was being interviewed by Radio Wales about it, they said to me, any more ambitions in life? And I stupidly said, my missus gave me such a row after, I went, oh yeah, I'd love to do what Wrexham have done and get Merthyr in the Premier League, which is obviously like, a joke. But it was picked up right by the press. So the BBC ran this article going, Jonny Owen wants to take Merthyr to the Premier League. I was like, oh, God. So, of course, you can imagine the comments are like, who do you think he is? He's hardly Ryan Reynolds, which is true. So I was like, I only meant it as a throwaway comment. But my missus was like, well, you can't mess about. They'll use that as a headline. So I was like, oh, God, that'll teach me a lesson. But here's the irony, kids. About a week later, an old school friend of mine, Anthony Lewis, who I was in primary school with, said, oh, I seen that headline about you wanting to get Merthyr to the Premier League. Well, is there any way I can help? Because he's a bright boy. He'd done really well for himself in Australia where he lived. And I was like, that's interesting. I said, because they're looking for a ground sponsor. So I said, why don't me and you go half each for a ground sponsorship? And I said, we'll just recall it Penydarren Park. I said, I'm not bothered. I got the name of the company on the shirt. And he's like, well, I'm not bothered about having my name. So we both clubbed in together because he'd seen this article of me messing around. And we both clubbed in to become the ground sponsors. So there's Penydarren Park again. So that was quite a nice story, really.
It is a nice story, and I'm so glad that you didn't go down the naming route. Because I think most people ignore those names anyway. I mean, it's only the sort of match reports that do. But does it come with any particular perks? Do you get to cut in line for the hot chocolate or anything like that? Or what's the best thing about being the sponsor of the ground?
I don't. I will say this: they do look after me magnificently. There, I think sometimes if I ask them if I could run on the pitch the last 10 minutes, they let me. Like, do you know what I mean? But they always get me upstairs. I have a pint with everybody. You know what I do, which makes everybody laugh? I still pay to go in because I just like to do my little bit, But if I need a car parking space and things like that, for me personally, I cannot speak highly enough of the board that are there now. The chairman Les, vice chairman Mark, all the boys on the board, and everybody of the fans. They treat me brilliantly. They know that I'm a Merthyr boy, that I've been going forever. My father did, my grandfather did. They know how much I care about the club. So the welcome I have is magnificent. And I will personally always keep trying to help as long as I can. That's how I feel about the club. I think it's really important that the club exists for everybody, that it's there, that it's a functioning, important part of the local community. They do amazing things there. Like I say, the club itself, the clubhouse is always busy. It's a great atmosphere. I love going there on match day. It's my favourite place to go. I think, the modern things about football that turns so many people off, which is such a shame, prices and all those kind of things. You can go to that ground. It's just over a tenner to go in. The beer's £3.50. You can watch a bit of football. You can even have a pint in the ground, as you know. You can go into the ground with a pint. And then your mates are there as well. So I can't speak highly enough of getting along to watch Merthyr and non-league football. I think everybody should try and do it a few times a season. They'd be really surprised by how much they enjoy it, I think.
Absolutely. I think I'm going to be, as we're recording this, I think I'll be going down to Carlton Town tonight. They've got a fairly big game against Dunstan.
Yeah.
But it's non-league football's amazing. And often on this podcast, we talk about the big stadiums. Last week, we were talking about Ibrox. I've got an episode coming up about the stadium in Dortmund, and they're great. But for most people, their first experience of football is something much more like Penydarren Park. So, Jonny, thank you for sharing your memories of it. Good luck. Hopefully, you get into the playoffs this year. I think that's the route for you. His fingers are crossed. And best of luck with everything to do with Merthyr.
Thank you, James. I thoroughly enjoyed that. And thanks for having me on. And just quickly before I go, I know Carlton Town very well. It's a ground I've visited many times. My mate Gary Clark is on the board there. So long may you reign, and good luck to you this season as well.
I mean, if there's a pie this man doesn't have his fingers in, we are yet to find it.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, Jonny. That was really, really interesting. I love talking about Penydarren Park. Big game for the Martyrs this weekend. Still got a chance of playoffs. They've got a home game against Harrow. It's the final game of the season, the day that this is going out. And best of luck to everyone at Penydarren Park, and hopefully you can squeeze into those playoffs. That's all for this week. I'll see you again next time.